My name's Evan Gilman. I work for PagerDuty. I'm an operations engineer there. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about bridging the Great Divide, or bringing disparate cultures in your org closer together. So just like any other company, PagerDuty started out pretty small. Here's a picture of our office tucked way back in the corner of some alley in San Francisco some years back. And when you have a very small culture like this, or a very small company, you tend to find a monoculture. Everyone kind of knows everybody. Everyone's very fit. Now, if you draw all those social relationships onto a graph, it might look something like this. It's very unified. There's a single culture. People are just kind of comfortable. And that's great, but you're going to grow, probably, hopefully. And when you grow, existing teams are going to grow, new teams are going to come in, new blood's going to come in, and culture is going to change. And what you end up with is just a more fragmented graph that looks kind of like this. You can see immediately that the relationships between team members are still quite strong, but the relationships between different teams, not so much. And that's what kind of brings this whole division in culture, right? You can see how far apart some of these teams are. And this leads to all sorts of problems, as everyone is aware. It can give unnecessary red tape, unnecessary bottlenecks. It can give cultural shear, where you have two very different cultures bumping up next to each other in a small spatial place like an office. And that cultural shear is really bad, and it gives us versus them, siloing, all kinds of stuff like this. So the question really is kind of, okay, well, what do we do about it? Unfortunately, you can't really attack it directly. It's a hard thing to do. You can't just put policies and rules that say you guys must behave like this or like that. People aren't generally very receptive to dictated culture. So instead, you have to be a little bit more nuanced about it. And what we're really kind of looking for is living together harmoniously, right? Teams are going to be different. I mean, that's just the way things go. And that's okay. We should embrace that. And instead, what we should do is we should focus on increasing interoperability between those teams, enabling those teams to work together without all these cultural barriers and nonsense. So you can see, given this graph, that these two teams are actually quite distant from each other. The distance leads to all sorts of problems. Like, a distant team can feel quite alien. Sometimes doesn't even feel like part of the same org. It's also a lot more expensive for information to travel to distant teams. You can see that this person way on one side of the graph is probably going to have a little bit harder time reaching a group way on the other side of the graph when you compare that to a group that might be kind of adjacent to the group that this individual is in. And so you'll also notice on this graph that we've got a high degree of clustering. There's a lot of clustering going on, and that's kind of normal. That's what you see when you throw teams together in an organization. Clustering is good because it really kind of brings the teams together and helps those team bonds. But on the other hand, it can also be bad because it will lead to team isolation, right? These teams are extremely infatuated with each other and never talk to any other teams. So really what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring these clusters closer together without disturbing the underlying cluster topology, right? And the way that you do that is very sparingly introduce some interteam relationships. Some people in the org will be more apt to creating social relationships than others will. And it's really, really important that every single team gets at least a couple of these people, because those people act as hubs on the graph. They bring the graph together. But be careful, not too many on a particular team. So if we go ahead and draw these lines into the graph and then rerun the graph layout algorithm, you'll see how it brings everything together quite nicely. All of those gaps are gone. There are now bridges across them. Teams can more easily affect changes in other teams as a result. Things are a lot closer together, and it's really, really important to understand is very little change has happened here. Only a few people have been engaged. 7 people out of 46 total. So 1 in 7 people in the org have been engaged to create new relationships, and only 6 new relationships have been created out of a total of hundreds. So it's very, very small change. The other interesting thing to note is that the one team that did not receive any new connections to the outside world, so to speak, has blasted way off to the corner of the graph and is now the furthest from the center of gravity of the graph than any other team. So it underlines the fact that every single team must receive one of these hubs. It also shows very nicely that if you have too many hubs in a team, you lose the cluster. This is a team that has too many hubs, and you can see how it's flown apart. They're no longer very close to each other. So we always recommend the key is less than 25% of the team should be acting as a hub. And if you can kind of identify these things and organize your teams properly, you'll see everyone is happy. At the end, people coexist very nicely, barriers are broken down, it's a win-win situation. And I hope that you guys can kind of take this back and see some of these patterns in your own org, because once you're able to recognize them, it's really easy to fix. You just have to be able to see it. So thank you, guys.